Welcome my dear listeners, stay with me to get the spoilers first. And subscribe to the channel. Let's find out what's going to happen on The Young and the Restless. Phyllis is worried about the company's hit because of Victor's new AI program. The Young and the Restless recap for Tuesday, April 21st, says that Victor and Victoria Newman will meet with Michael Baldwin to warn him about what's going to happen to Summer's conglomerate. At the ranch, Victor and Victoria will talk about the first part of the plan, which is to pay a lot of Phyllis Summer's remaining employees to leave the company. Victoria says that Phyllis will soon lose most of her workers. Victor will then use the new AI program he made to go after Phyllis and get Newman Enterprises back. This program will make it impossible for Phyllis to deny that she was involved in criminal activity, such as Billy Abbott and Kane Ashby talking about shady things while Phyllis was still in charge of Chancellor. Victor will think he can get Newman back by threatening to send him to prison if he can blackmail Phyllis with illegal activities. Michael will worry that Victor might lose control of this new AI program, but Victor won't share those worries. Michael doesn't want Lauren to get hurt because she wasn't involved in Phyllis's bad behavior. Victor will say that he is giving Michael this heads up so that he can get Lauren to quit. Victoria will drop hints about Nikki Newman needing to be there now that Michael is gone and they are getting the company back. Victor will say that Nikki doesn't want to be there and that the family will have to learn to deal with it. Christine Blair Romolotti will meet with Danny Romolotti at the GCC after his trip to Barcelona. She will also say that the DA is stepping down for health reasons. Christine will also admit that she has been asked to finish the DA's term, so she will think about the good and bad things about going back to the job. Daniel Romolotti Jr. will find out about Christine's possible return to the DA role at some point. Daniel will be left wondering if Christine will have any say in what happens with Mariah Copeland's plea deal if she takes the job. Christine will say that she can't do anything about it because a panel of judges will make the decision, but she thinks that Devin Winter's attempt to overturn the plea deal is a long shot anyway. But Christine will think about the possibility that Devin wants to push Mariah too far so that she goes to jail. Michael will say that he told Christina to take over for the DA who is leaving after he shows up on Tuesday's YNR episode. Devin will get into a big fight with Abby Winters at the Park Cafe. She'll say she's never seen him like this before. Abby will wonder if Devin wants to send Mariah so far off the rails that she ends up in jail. Devin won't think that would be the worst thing that could happen. Devin will sarcastically say that he should support his wife by having Mariah come over to babysit Dominic Winters, since Abby will see Mariah as a friend. Abby will call Devin out for being rude just before he storms off, and Daniel will see this happen. Phyllis will feel good at Newman Enterprises because business is going well. Then though, department heads will start sending her emails about their immediate resignations. Phyllis will get more emails as she learns that most of the other workers are leaving too. That will make Phyllis want to pay a lot of money for new ones, but Lauren will be worried and think Victor has cornered the market on that too. After Lauren leaves, Phyllis will call people and find out that Victor has already talked to a lot of the people she would have hired to replace all the employees who are leaving. Michael will tell Lauren that the Summers conglomerate will soon be gone now that Victor's plan is in motion. Stay tuned for more Young and the Restless spoilers that say Victor will do whatever it takes to get Newman Enterprises back. Victor heard the truth, and after Victor died, Nikki made Nick CEO of Newman. There was always a certain kind of silence in the Newman mansion. It wasn't the calm quiet of a home at rest. It was the tense, alert quiet of a place built on power, secrets, and the constant fear that someone would come in with bad news. The house seemed to hold its breath in the quiet of the early evening. The long hallways were clean and shiny. The portraits on the walls looked back at you with a kind of inherited judgment. And in the study, where Victor Newman had ruled his world with iron precision for so many years, the lamps cast a soft light over a desk that looked more like a command center than a place to think. Victor stood by the window with one hand in his pocket and the other holding a glass he hadn't touched in a while. He had been there long enough to know that something wasn't right. At first it was just a feeling. Nikki's voice changed slightly when she talked on the phone. Nick came and went too quickly as if he had a thought he didn't want to share. The strange tension in the house that was almost invisible but impossible to ignore once Victor saw it. Victor Newman trusted his gut feelings like other men trusted facts. And his gut was telling him to be careful. He turned when the door to the study opened, expecting Nikki. Instead, it was a member of the staff who told him that Nikki was in the music room talking to Nick and asked if he needed anything. Victor said, "No," very clearly. The staff member left right away. Victor looked at them for a moment, then slowly put the glass down. He heard voices coming from down the hall. At first they were hard to make out, but as the house settled around them they became clearer. He often heard things in his own home. In the Newman world, privacy was always an illusion, and the truth always seemed to find a way to get out. But what he heard next made him stop in his tracks. Nick said, "I can't keep doing this." Victor's forehead creased. Nikki's voice came next, lower but still strong. "You don't have a choice now." Victor walked quietly to the music room's half-open door. He didn't want to listen. He would not tell that story again, even to himself. He just wanted to know what kind of crisis had brought that tone into his home. But by the time he got to the door, he had already heard enough to know that this was not a small argument. Nick stood next to the piano, nervous and anxious, with one hand running through his hair. Nikki sat on the couch, completely calm, but Victor could see that she was stressed around her eyes. That one detail made him know this was serious. Nick shook his head. "Mom, this is going to blow up in our faces." Nikki gave him that calm, measured look that she used when she was trying not to freak out. "Then we take care of it before it does." "And what if Dad finds out?" Nikki stopped moving. Victor's fingers gripped the doorframe more tightly. Nick let out a breath. "I thought that too." Nikki got up slowly. "Victor doesn't need to know what every decision is before it is made." Nick laughed for a short time, but it was bitter. "You say that like he won't find out anyway." Victor's jaw got tight. At that point he should have pushed the door open. He should have introduced himself and asked for answers. But something in the room kept him from moving. He could tell from the way they spoke and the weight of their words that this wasn't just business. This was about a choice being made around him, maybe even against him, and he needed to know how far it went. Nikki moved closer to Nick. "Your father has been under a lot of stress." "That's one way to put it." She didn't smile. "He is still your dad." Nick's voice got a little softer. "I know that. But I also know what this means if we keep going." Victor's pulse slowed down and became colder and more dangerous. "Go ahead." "What with?" Nikki looked down the hall, and for a terrifying second, Victor thought she might have seen him. But she didn't turn. She took a deep breath and said, "The board will make a decision later if we don't act now. And that choice might not be good for the family." Victor's eyes narrowed. The board. The family. A choice. Nick looked at her. "You're really going to do this?" Nikki raised her chin. "I'm doing what needs to be done." Victor stepped back from the door and quietly walked away into the dark hallway. His mind was already putting things together, looking for patterns and testing them for weaknesses. Nick and Nikki. The board. A choice. Something had happened or was about to happen that had more to do with Victor than either of them knew. He went back to the study, but only for a short time. He didn't sit down. He didn't reach for his glass. He just stood there, thinking the way he did when the world was about to change around him. After that he heard footsteps. Nikki went in first, and for a second her face was blank. Then it changed when she saw him. Victor's eyes moved from her to Nick, who had been right behind her. No one said anything for one brief moment. Then Victor said in a friendly way, "I think I just heard enough of the truth to deserve the rest." Nikki's face got tense. Nick turned his head away. Victor gave a small nod, which was more dangerous than a shout. "That's interesting. Since it seems that I am no longer welcome to talk about my own family, maybe one of you could explain why my name has been linked to a decision that I was not consulted about." Nikki got in the way before Nick could answer. "Victor, this isn't the time." "When is the moment then?" he asked. "What? After the job is done? So you want me to accept whatever fate you have planned for me?" Nick went ahead. "Hey Dad." Victor gave him a sharp look that cut him off. "Don't dad me until you can explain what you mean." Nick took a breath. Nikki shut her eyes for a moment before opening them again. "We were talking about making plans for when things go wrong." Victor's mouth got hard. "Planning for what?" Nobody answered. Victor looked at them both, and the silence spoke for itself. "Sit down," he said. "Not either." "Yow." Nick sat on the edge of the couch this time, but Nikki stayed standing. Victor looked at her with quiet anger. He said, "You are planning around me." Nikki spoke carefully. "I am making plans for the business. For Newman. For the future." Victor almost laughed. "How noble. And how nice that the future seems to start without me having to do anything." Nick rubbed his jaw with his hand. That's not how it is, Dad. Then tell me what it means. Nick looked at Nikki and then back at Victor. The pause said everything. Victor's eyes got sharper. Nikki took charge. People are worried about your health. Victor stood completely still. Nick began to speak, but Nikki raised her hand slightly to stop him. Victor thought bitterly that she was brave. Maybe he was too brave to tell her something this serious while he was standing in front of her, healthy enough to fight and angry enough to set the house on fire. What worries? Victor asked. Nikki's voice shook a little. The doctors have told me to be careful. Victor's eyes were fixed on her. What doctors? Nick's silence was all the answer I needed. Victor looked back and forth between them, and for the first time in the room his face showed something like pain. It went away almost right away and the steel came back, but not before Nikki saw it. Was that your plan? Victor said in a soft voice. To talk about my health behind my back and then get ready to replace me? No, Victor, Nikki said. Then what? Nick stood up all of a sudden. We were talking about what would happen if things got worse. Victor's voice got lower. What things? Nick didn't say anything. Nikki did. Your condition, she said. It looked like the room was falling in on itself. Victor's face changed so little that to anyone else, it would have looked like nothing at all. But Nikki was smarter. She noticed the small change in his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw, and the stillness that only came over him when he was deciding whether to blow up or pull back and think. What kind of condition? Why? He asked. Nikki shook her head. You are very tired. Distress. He made a quick motion to cut her off. Don't talk to me like I'm weak. Nikki said, I'm talking to you like a wife. And the emotion in her voice finally broke through her calm. A wife who has seen you go beyond what is reasonable for years. A wife who knows how much it costs to act like everything is fine. Victor stared at her for a long time. Then he said, so this is what it is. You have decided that I am failing. Nick got up. Nobody said that. No. Victor asked. Then why are you talking about succession? Nick's silence was quick and damning. Victor moved closer and his voice was now threatening, no longer polite. Talk to me. Nikki's eyes filled up, but she didn't look away. Because someone had to. Victor laughed once, but it wasn't funny. Someone had to make the decision to get my son ready to take my place. Nick's head jerked up. I never said I wanted your spot. Then what did you want? Nick was breathing harder now because he was angry about the emotional minefield in front of him. I wanted a plan. So, we need stability if your health gets worse, if the board sees weakness, or if the company starts to slip. Victor's voice was so sharp that it could cut stone. And you think that naming my son CEO before I even leave the room will bring stability? Nikki stepped in again, and this time her voice was strong. Nobody said you could leave the room before. Victor looked at her. What does that mean? It wasn't an accident that there was silence after that. It was the kind of silence that holds all the weight of a truth that no one wants to say out loud. Victor first looked at Nikki, then at Nick, and finally understood that this was not a conversation about something abstract. It had been a choice that had been quietly, desperately, and very recently made to get ready for the impossible. Victor's anger turned into something colder and deeper, and a shadow seemed to pass through the study. He said, tell me the truth. Now. Nikki's lips opened. Her eyes were wet now, but she was still trying to stay calm. Nick turned away. And at that moment Victor got it. Not everything. Not yet. But that's enough. Someone is dying, he said. Nick's face broke. Nikki made a small, strangled noise. Victor stood still and the air slowly left the room in a horrible way. No, he said. Nikki shook her head and tears finally fell. Victor. No. Nick took 2 steps across the room. Listen to me, Dad. Victor stepped back as if the words had hit him. No. Dad. Victor's hand went up. Don't come any closer. Nick came to a stop. Grief made the room quiet in a way that only grief can. There was no more yelling. No smart moves. There is no Newman power posture to hide behind. Only the truth, plain and harsh. Victor looked at Nikki like he had never really seen her before. How long? Nikki couldn't say anything. Nick did. Recently it was confirmed. Victor's throat worked. And you kept it a secret. Nikki's voice broke. We were looking for the right time. Victor turned away quickly, putting one hand on the desk as if it were the only thing keeping him from falling over. This was the kind of pain that couldn't be fought with strategy for a man who had been through wars, betrayals, prison, corporate battles, and enemies who had underestimated him and died regretting it. The silence went on. Then Victor asked very quietly, "How long?" Nick looked at Nikki once more. Nikki answered this time. "They're not sure. But the doctors think it could get worse." Victor shut his eyes. For one rare moment the great Victor Newman didn't look like a giant. He looked like a husband and father who had just been told that the world was going to ask more of him than he could handle. The feeling was gone when he opened his eyes again. "That's why you were talking about Nick," he said. Nikki nodded. Nick looked at Victor. "And you said yes." Nick's voice was rough. "I said yes because Mom told me to think about the business. About the family. What would happen if you couldn't keep going?" Victor's face didn't change, but it was clear that he was hurt. "And you didn't think I had the right to know." Nick told the truth. "We were trying to save you." Victor smiled a short, bitter smile. "That's always the reason." Nikki walked up to him. "Please, Victor." He looked at her with a look that was more hurt than angry. "How many times, Nikki? How many times have people around me decided what I can handle?" She didn't say anything, because there was no answer that would make this less bad. Victor looked at the two of them, then at the room itself, at the polished desk, the framed pictures, and the signs of a life built on the idea that he would outlive everyone else. Death had always been an abstract enemy for Victor, something to make fun of but never name. Hearing it said out loud in his own home changed everything. Finally, he said, "If this is true, the company needs to be safe." Nikki let out a shaky sigh, hoping that he hadn't completely shut himself off. But Victor put up a hand. "Don't confuse being practical with being accepted." Nick nodded his head slowly. "That's fair." Victor looked back at him. "You will be ready." Nick frowned a little. "Ready for what?" Victor's eyes got sharper again, but the sadness was still there. "For duty. To put pressure on. For every person in this city who can smell weakness as soon as they think Newman is weak." Nick looked at his dad and then at his mom. "Dad." Victor cut him off. "You think I'm blind? I know what happens when people think power is unstable. I know what the board is going to do. I know what enemies will come around. I know what vultures wait for a family to do." He moved closer to Nick and his voice was steady again but quieter. "You will carry this burden well if it is yours." Nick sat up straight. "Yes, I will." Victor's eyes darted to Nikki. "And you?" She wiped her face to try to pull herself together. "Me? You will no longer be able to tell me what I can and cannot know." The words were harsh but not mean. They were Victor's way of begging. Nikki nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes." The night went on, but things in the house stayed the same. There were calls to make, papers to read, trusts to look over, and emergency plans that had once seemed like they were just ideas but were now very real. Victor was adamant about seeing everything. He asked questions that no one else had the guts to ask. He wanted names, dates, plans, board reactions, and legal structures. He wanted to know the whole truth no matter how painful it was. And through it all, something strange started to happen. Victor was not giving up. He was getting ready. The next morning he called the family and the board together for what he said was a strategic meeting. People didn't talk about being sick in public. No one said the word, death. Not yet. But everyone in the room could feel the change in the air, as if fate's hand was starting to press down. Victor stood at the head of the table, looking as perfect as always, but there was a shadow in him that hadn't been there before. Nikki sat next to him, looking pale but calm. Nick stood across from them, clearly tense, and it took a lot of effort to keep his face calm. The board members looked at each other's faces and felt like they were missing a story. Victor started the meeting with a calm announcement. He said, "Newman Enterprises needs a succession structure." People in the room started to murmur right away. They all stopped talking when Victor raised one hand. "I won't put up with any uncertainty about this company," he said. "And I won't let people outside my family guess what will happen to our legacy in the future." He looked right at the board, then at Nick. "So the change starts now." The room was different. Everyone knew what was going on even before anyone asked. Nick stood there while Victor talked about how important it is to have a steady hand in a time of change, as well as leadership continuity and operational authority. It wasn't a coronation. Victor Newman would never let that happen. It was something more difficult and important. An admission that the empire needed a future that wasn't just one man's will. The room got very quiet when Victor finally spoke. Nick will be the CEO of Newman Enterprises. Nick's breath stopped. Nikki shut her eyes. Victor kept looking at his son. Not because I don't believe in my own strength anymore. But I believe in his. That sentence meant more than any title. Nick looked at him, clearly shaken. Dad. With just one look, Victor cut him off. Don't get too emotional about this. Nick smiled a little bitterly, and for a moment all the years between them seemed to fade away. Too late. Some of the board members looked at each other, but no one dared to speak over Victor Newman at that time. He stood tall, which made the choice look more like a plan than giving up. But Nikki, who was watching him closely, saw the truth behind it. He didn't find this easy. He had to pay something to say it. He lost pride, control, and the idea that things would stay the same. But he did it anyway. That was what made the moment so strong. Not because Victor had lost. Because he had decided to face the unavoidable without flinching. Later, after the board had broken up and the formalities were over, Nikki found Victor alone in the study again, which was where everything had started. He stood by the window and looked out at the grounds. She said softly, "You did the right thing." Victor didn't turn. "Don't sound so happy." She sighed sadly. "I'm not happy." He looked back at her. The hardness in his face had faded just enough for people to see how tired he was. "How much this hurt." He said, "Nick was always going to be the one." Nikki got closer. "How you know that?" Victor nodded quickly. "I know a lot of things now." She stayed put. Finally, he said, "I should have known sooner." Nikki's eyes filled up again. "I know." He stared at her for a long time before saying in a voice that was much quieter than she had expected, "Don't make a habit of keeping the truth from me." Nikki smiled, but it was shaky. "I'll do my best not to." Then he reached for her hand and she took it. Not because the pain was gone. Not because everything was fixed. But their love had been through too many storms to end because of one horrible truth. Nick stood outside the study door down the hall, listening to the quiet inside. He had just taken on one of the heaviest responsibilities a man could have, and the weight of it was already starting to settle on his shoulders. But there was something else under the fear. Thankfulness. Not because his father was dying, God forbid, but because Victor had given him the future. Nick let out a long breath and looked out the window at the darkening sky. He knew the road ahead would be hard. The board would put him to the test. The competitors would circle. The name Newman would draw everyone in the city like a moth to a flame. And in the midst of all the sadness and chaos, he would have to show that he was his own man, not just Victor's replacement. Victor and Nikki stayed quiet for a little while longer in the study. Then Victor said almost to himself, "The empire lives on." Nikki held his hand tightly. "Because of you." Victor kept looking out the window. He said, "No. Because Nick is ready." And for the first time since the truth had changed their lives, that sounded less like defeat and more like fate. Legacies were never easy in Genoa City. They were built on loyalty and betrayal, love and manipulation, sacrifice and survival. They lived on in old names, old grudges, and kids who spent their whole lives trying not to be like the people who raised them. But when everything was said and done, one thing was clear. Victor Newman had heard the truth, and it had changed everything. Not just because it showed off the weakness he hated the most. Not just because it made Nikki face the price of keeping things to herself. Not just because it made Nick do something he had always tried to avoid. It changed everything because the Newman family had to finally admit what they had been avoiding for years. That power can't stop time, and no one, not even Victor Newman, can rule forever. Nikki didn't just make a business decision when she named Nick CEO after Victor died. It was the only way for the family empire to stay alive. With sadness. With stress. Love. And with Newman's strong will to keep going no matter what it costs.